The mortar attack warning screamed across forward operating base Copper, ripping through the late afternoon heat like a blade through fabric. Willow Hart stood beside the coffee maker at Copper's corner, her hand steady on the carafe. Even as the siren's wail sent most personnel into immediate panic mode, she didn't run, she didn't shout. Muscle memory took over. In half a second, Willow was in bunker position against the reinforced concrete wall, hands covering her head, legs spread at the exact angle drilled into operators during advanced combat training, body angled away from the windows to minimize blast exposure. The movement was flawless, automatic, professional, too perfect for an admin clerk. Staff Sergeant Fletcher Kane, 6 feet 2 inches of combat infantry arrogance wrapped in desert camouflage, stared at her from across the recreation facility, his coffee cup trembling in his grip. 3 full seconds passed before the first round detonated outside the perimeter. 15 other personnel in the room were still processing the alarm, still turning toward exits, still trying to remember their emergency protocols. But Willow had been in position before the explosion ever came. "Holy cow," Fletcher breathed as he finally dove for cover, his form sloppy, shoulder exposed, raw panic flickering across his face. "How did you—" Willow didn't respond. She simply watched him with eyes that revealed nothing, her small fingers already performing an automatic assessment, counting exits, cataloging personnel locations, evaluating structural integrity, habits from another lifetime, habits she'd worked hard to forget. "Lucky reflex," she said quietly when the all-clear sounded 90 seconds later, her voice flat and professional. Admin voice. Nothing remarkable, just another day at the office. Fletcher studied her longer than necessary, skepticism crawling across his sun-weathered features. In the next 20 minutes, that look would transform into something far more complicated. They were about to discover that Willow Hart wasn't just some clerk hiding behind a keyboard in an air-conditioned office. And that revelation would change absolutely everything. The all-clear tone cut through the tension, signaling the attack had been probing fire. 3 rounds, no casualties, typical harassment from insurgent forces testing base defenses. Willow was the last person to emerge from cover, her movements methodical as she checked each exit route, her gaze sweeping the room with the kind of systematic attention that had nothing to do with clerical work. Fletcher noticed. He always noticed things that didn't fit his worldview. "That was some seriously lucky positioning, Hart," he said, loud enough for the dozen people still gathering themselves. Most folks were still figuring out which way to run. Willow didn't take the bait. She simply picked up the fallen coffee carafe, noted the spilled liquid spreading across the counter, and reached for paper towels. Her hands moved with quiet efficiency, cleaning the mess while others traded war stories about where they'd been when the siren hit. Captain Sabira Cross entered through the main door, her logistics officer uniform crisp despite the dust clouds settling over the base. She surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who thrived on hierarchy, her gaze landing on Willow with thinly veiled disdain. "I see our support personnel managed to stay calm while the real soldiers handled the situation," Sabira announced, her tone suggesting this was generous praise. Always reassuring when the admin staff doesn't add to the chaos. Several infantry soldiers chuckled. Willow continued wiping down the counter, her expression unchanged. Fletcher leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Willow with an intensity that suggested he was working through a puzzle that didn't quite solve. The way she'd moved, that wasn't luck, that was training. But admin clerks didn't get that kind of training. They processed paperwork and filed forms and occasionally answered phones. They didn't execute textbook bunker positions faster than combat veterans with 3 deployments. The inconsistency bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Willow finished cleaning, disposed of the paper towels, and headed toward the exit without a word. No reaction to Sabira's condescension, no acknowledgement of Fletcher's scrutiny, just professional silence and an economy of movement that seemed almost deliberate in its restraint. "Hart," Sabira called out, "before you leave, I need those leave request forms processed by 1800 hours. Some of us have actual operational timelines." "Yes, ma'am," Willow replied, her voice carrying no inflection whatsoever. "They'll be ready." She disappeared through the door, leaving Fletcher still staring after her, with questions he couldn't quite articulate. The S-1 personnel office was a climate-controlled refuge from Afghanistan's punishing heat. A small kingdom of filing cabinets and computer terminals where Willow spent her days managing the administrative machinery that kept 400 personnel moving through deployments, leaves, and transfers. Specialist Liam Turner sat at the adjacent desk, a 22-year-old with a perpetual smirk, and the kind of casual cruelty that came from insecurity dressed as confidence. "Heard you had quite the reflex during the attack," Liam said, not looking up from his screen. "Fletcher was telling everyone about it. Thinks maybe you've been holding out on us." Willow settled into her chair, logging into her terminal with the muscle memory of routine. "Just got lucky with positioning." "Sure." Liam's smile widened. "Hey, speaking of luck, looks like some of those leave forms you finished yesterday got mixed up in my stack. Accidentally overwrote a few fields. Gonna need you to redo about 3 hours of work." He wasn't apologetic. He wasn't even trying to hide the sabotage. Willow pulled up the files, saw immediately where he'd deliberately corrupted her completed work, and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not anger, not frustration, just a distant recognition of a pattern she'd seen in 100 different forms. People testing boundaries, looking for reactions, trying to establish dominance through small acts of cruelty. She'd survived interrogations in Syrian safe houses. Liam Turner's petty office politics barely registered. "I'll have them redone by 1600 hours, she said simply. "You're not even mad?" Liam looked almost disappointed. Most people would at least complain. No point. Willow opened the first form, her fingers already retyping data with mechanical precision. "Complaining doesn't fix files." Liam stared at her for a long moment, trying to understand someone who refused to play the game he'd mastered. Finally, he shrugged and returned to his own work, the small victory somehow feeling hollow. Willow worked in silence, her mind tracking multiple streams simultaneously, the administrative tasks flowing through her fingers, the ambient sounds of the office, the rhythm of footsteps in the hallway outside. Threat assessment was second nature, even here in the safest corner of the base. Especially here, where she'd deliberately chosen obscurity as armor against her past. By 1730 hours, the corrupted forms were corrected and submitted. Liam had already left for dinner. Willow locked her terminal, straightened her desk, with the kind of precision that would have made any drill sergeant nod approval, and headed toward Copper's Corner for the evening gathering. The recreation facility had transformed into an informal social hub, 15 to 20 personnel scattered across tables and couches, the TV broadcasting a football game nobody was really watching. Fletcher held court near the coffee station, recounting his version of the mortar attack with the practiced ease of someone who would learn to turn every experience into personal narrative. And there I was, diving for cover like a professional, when I noticed Hart's already in position. Perfect form, perfect angle, made me look slow. He laughed, but there was an edge beneath the humor. Almost makes you wonder where a clerk picks up those kinds of reflexes. Private First Class Blake Summers, a kid who couldn't be more than 20, fresh-faced and earnest, glanced toward the corner where Willow had settled with a tablet full of deployment schedules. Maybe she had good training? Admin training? Fletcher's eyebrow arched. They teach you how to type fast and file properly. They don't drill you on bunker positions and blast wave dynamics. Could have been prior service, suggested Sergeant Forrester Cole, Fletcher's closest friend and a fellow infantry soldier who'd learned to echo whatever opinions Fletcher projected. Her file says she came in straight as admin. No combat MOS, no deployment experience before this rotation. Fletcher took a long drink of coffee, his gaze drifting across the room to where Willow sat. "Just interesting, that's all." Corporal Chloe West, one of 2 other admin staff at FUB Copper and someone who'd quietly appreciated Willow's competence over the past 6 months, leaned forward from her spot on the couch. Maybe she's just naturally coordinated? Not everything has to be suspicious. Sabira's voice cut through the conversation like a blade. "Don't defend mediocrity, Corporal. Administrative personnel serve a function, but let's not pretend that function requires the same caliber as combat operations." The room shifted subtly, people choosing sides through silence or subtle body language. Fletcher didn't disagree. Forrester nodded along. Blake looked uncomfortable but didn't speak up. Willow kept her eyes on the tablet, her expression revealing nothing. She'd heard variations of this conversation 1,000 times across 100 different forward operating bases. The hierarchy was always the same. Combat arms at the top, support personnel dismissed as lesser. It was easier to let them believe it than to correct the assumption. Correction meant questions. Questions meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant people might discover who she'd been before she became Willow Hart, admin clerk, professional, invisible person. Blake gathered his courage and approached her table, deployment paperwork clutched in nervous hands. Ma'am, I have a question about my leave request timing. Sit. Willow's voice was gentle, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. He sat, spreading out the forms, explaining his situation with the kind of anxious energy that came from being new to military bureaucracy. Willow walked him through the process with patient precision, her explanations clear and methodical. As she spoke, her hands automatically folded a napkin someone had left on the table, creasing it into a perfect triangle with military corners, the kind of fold that had nothing to do with civilian habits. Blake noticed. My drill sergeant used to do that exact fold, said it was how they did it in airborne school. Willow's hands froze for half a second. Then she deliberately unfolded the napkin, smoothing it flat with casual indifference. Interesting coincidence. But Blake's observation had carried across the quiet room. Fletcher was watching again, his expression sharpening with renewed curiosity. The moment passed. Willow finished explaining the leave request process, Blake thanked her and retreated, and the evening gathering continued its lazy drift toward lights out. But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere, a question mark hanging in the air where previously there had been only dismissive certainty. Master Sergeant Jasper Reed entered at 2000 hours, his rangemaster authority preceding him like a weather front. 42 years old, weathered by 2 decades of military service, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd forgotten more about weapon systems than most people would ever learn. Listen up, he announced, silencing the room's scattered conversations. Range qualification tomorrow at 0800. All combat personnel mandatory. Support staff optional, but recommended if you want to pretend you understand what real soldiers do for a living. His gaze swept across the admin personnel. Willow, Chloe, Liam, with the kind of benign contempt that didn't even register as insult anymore. Just statement of fact in his worldview. I'll be there, Willow said quietly. The room went silent. Even the football game seemed to pause. Jasper turned toward her, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something like amusement. That right, Hart? You familiar with weapon systems? Basic qualifications. Her voice remained flat, professional. M4, M9. Well, Jasper's smile widened. Should be entertaining. We'll see if admin training translates to actual marksmanship. Fletcher leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching this exchange with barely concealed fascination. Something was building here, some kind of confrontation that promised to answer the questions he'd been accumulating since the mortar attack. Before we continue with what happened next at FUB Copper, I need you to do something critical. Hit that subscribe button right now. Why? Because this story gets darker, more intense, and the reveal that's coming will absolutely shock you. Every week, we bring you real stories of underdogs who turned the tables on those who underestimated them. Don't miss what happens when Fletcher discovers who Willow really is. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and let's get back to Afghanistan. The night settled over FUB Copper, with the kind of heavy silence that came from exhaustion and routine. Willow returned to her quarters, a small, containerized housing unit she shared with Chloe, organized with the sparse efficiency of someone who had learned to live out of a duffel bag for years. Everything had its place, nothing extraneous. A lifestyle that looked like minimalism, but was actually just operational readiness disguised as civilian normalcy. Chloe was already in her bunk, scrolling through her phone. You didn't have to volunteer for range day. Jasper was just being Jasper. All bark, no real expectations. I know. Willow set her tablet on the small desk, began her evening routine with mechanical precision. So, why do it? Why not? Chloe studied her roommate with the kind of curiosity that came from 6 months of shared space and still feeling like she barely knew this person. You're strange, Hart. In a good way, I think. But strange. Willow offered a small smile, rare enough to be notable. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. Chloe returned to her phone, then added quietly, Fletcher's going to make it weird tomorrow. He's been building some kind of narrative about you since the attack. Like he can't accept that you're just good at your job. People see what they expect to see. Willow changed into her PT gear, prepared for the next day with the kind of advanced planning that had nothing to do with administrative work. Fletcher expects admin staff to be incompetent. Anything that contradicts that expectation becomes suspicious. You're not worried? About range qualification? Willow shook her head. It's just marksmanship. But that wasn't quite true, and she knew it. Tomorrow would require careful calibration, shooting well enough to pass without drawing additional scrutiny, demonstrating competence without revealing the thousands of hours she'd spent on ranges far more demanding than anything Phobocopter offered. Walking the razor's edge between invisible and suspicious. The skill she'd mastered better than any weapon system, controlled mediocrity. She settled into her bunk, closed her eyes, and tried not to think about Syria. About the mission that had ended everything. About the 2 team members who hadn't made it home because she'd trusted the wrong intelligence, followed the wrong protocol, believed in a system that turned out to be compromised at levels she still didn't fully understand. The encrypted phone in her footlocker, turned off for 2 years, buried under spare uniforms, remained silent. Ghost Unit 7 had stopped trolling. The activity had moved on. She'd earned her retirement through blood and failure, and some nights that felt like the only honest transaction she'd ever made. Tomorrow she'd shoot targets and pretend to be average, and maintain the cover that had kept her sane for 6 months. Tonight she'd try not to dream about Damascus. 800 hours arrived with Afghanistan's relentless sun already baking the desert floor to temperatures that would climb past 110 degrees by midday. The range facility sat 200 yards outside the main perimeter, reinforced berms, target stands at varying distances, a small control bunker where Jasper Reed orchestrated qualification courses with the precision of someone who genuinely loved his job. 23 personnel assembled, predominantly combat infantry with a smattering of support staff who'd decided to participate. Willow stood toward the back, her utility uniform identical to everyone else's, her small frame making her almost invisible among the larger soldiers. Fletcher positioned himself near the front, Forrester at his side, both of them projecting the casual confidence of people who'd done this hundreds of times. Sabira arrived fashionably late, her logistics officer authority somehow translating even to recreational marksmanship. "All right, listen up," Jasper bellowed, his rangemaster voice cutting through the morning heat. "Standard qualification course. 50 rounds, multiple distances, timed strings. Combat personnel know the drill. Support staff. Try not to shoot yourselves or anyone else." Scattered laughter. Willow's expression didn't change. "We'll run 4 shooters at a time. Fletcher, Forrester, Morrison, and Jackson. You're first. Let's set the standard for the youngsters." The first string went exactly as expected. Solid shooting from experienced infantry soldiers, tight groupings, professional weapon handling. Fletcher posted a respectable score, clearly pleased with himself. Forrester matched him almost exactly. The morning progressed through various skill levels, Jasper calling out scores and offering running commentary on technique. By 1000 hours, most combat personnel had completed their strings. The support staff began their rotations, predictably mediocre results, a few safety violations, nervous laughter from people who clearly didn't spend much time behind weapons. "Hart," Jasper called out, "you're up. Let's see if those basic qualifications translate to actual performance." Willow stepped to the line, accepted the M4 carbine from the range safety officer, and performed a functions check with movements that were just slightly too smooth. She caught herself, deliberately fumbled the charging handle on the second attempt, added a moment of hesitation that suggested uncertainty rather than practiced skill. Fletcher moved closer, ostensibly to observe, but really to scrutinize. Something about this whole situation had been bothering him since yesterday's mortar attack, and he couldn't quite let it go. 50 rounds, multiple targets, your time starts on the buzzer, Jasper announced. "Ready position." Willow shouldered the weapon, settling into a stance that felt like coming home. Her finger indexed along the receiver, breathing automatically regulating, vision naturally shifting to proper sight alignment, every habit screaming at her to perform, to demonstrate the thousands of hours she'd spent training with Tier 1 units. But she was Willow Hart, admin clerk, not Ghost 7's advanced force operator, not the woman who'd called airstrikes and extracted intelligence assets and survived interrogations that should have killed her. The buzzer sounded. She fired her first string, center mass hits, acceptable grouping, exactly the kind of performance you would expect from someone with basic qualifications. Not impressive, not terrible, professionally average, reload, second string. She deliberately pulled one shot low, overcorrected on the next, settled into a rhythm that suggested competence without expertise. But she couldn't completely suppress the muscle memory. The weapon handling was too fluid, the transitions between targets too clean, the breathing control too consistent. Jasper noticed. His expression shifted from amused tolerance to genuine interest. Fletcher definitely noticed. He stepped closer to the firing line, watching the way Willow's hands moved through reload drills with the kind of economy that came from repetition, measured in tens of thousands. Final string. Willow let her grouping drift slightly wider, sacrificing precision for the appearance of normal human variation. She cleared the weapon, set it on safe, stepped back from the line with the kind of tactical awareness that had nothing to do with admin work, checking her six, scanning the range, confirming safety protocols without conscious thought. "Decent shooting, Hart," Jasper said, studying the target. "Better than I expected from support staff. That's a qualifying score with room to spare." "Thank you, Sergeant." Willow's voice carried no pride, no satisfaction, just professional acknowledgement. But Fletcher was circling now, his infantry instincts triggered by inconsistencies he couldn't quite articulate. The way she'd handled that weapon, the grip, the stance, the automatic threat scanning, none of it matched someone whose only experience came from basic qualification courses. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" he asked, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than confrontation. "Basic training, required qualifications." Willow met his gaze with eyes that revealed nothing. "Same as everyone else." "Right." Fletcher didn't sound convinced. "Same as everyone else." Jasper called the next group of shooters, and the moment passed. But something had shifted in Fletcher's assessment of Willow Hart. She'd moved from irrelevant admin clerk to minor mystery worth investigating, which was exactly what Willow had been trying to avoid. The afternoon heat drove most personnel back to air-conditioned spaces, but Copper's Corner remained the social hub where off-duty soldiers gravitated for coffee and conversation. Sergeant First Class Martha Quinn, a medical NCO with 15 years of experience and the kind of observational skills that came from treating casualties, sat across from Willow at one of the small tables, ostensibly reviewing medical readiness forms, but actually conducting her own quiet investigation. "Those calluses on your hands," Martha said casually, not looking up from her paperwork. "They're not from typing." Willow's fingers stilled on her tablet. "I do pull-ups in my free time." "Sure." Martha finally looked up, her gaze direct but not unkind. "I've seen a lot of hands in my career. Infantry hands, pilot hands, mechanic hands. Yours have patterns I don't usually see on admin personnel. What patterns would those be? Weapon wear? Rope burns that have healed into permanent marks. Trigger finger callousing that suggests thousands of rounds, not just yearly qualifications." Martha leaned back, her expression neutral. "I'm not trying to cause problems, just making an observation." Willow considered various responses, settled on partial truth. "I take my PT seriously. Climbing ropes, functional fitness, helps manage stress." "Fair enough." Martha didn't push further, but her slight smile suggested she didn't believe the deflection. "We all have our methods." The conversation drifted to safer topics: deployment schedules, medical supply chain issues, the persistent food complaints that united all military personnel regardless of rank or specialty. But Martha's observation hung in the air like smoke, another small crack in the careful cover Willow had constructed. Across the room, Fletcher and Forrester occupied their usual position, coffee in hand, dissecting the day's events with the kind of analytical intensity they normally reserve for mission planning. "I'm telling you, something's off," Fletcher insisted, keeping his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry. "The way she moved on that range, that wasn't basic training muscle memory. That was serious repetition." "So she practices." Forrester shrugged. "Maybe she's just naturally athletic." "It's more than that. The tactical awareness, the threat scanning, the way she automatically checked her six after clearing the weapon, those are combat habits. You don't develop that kind of situational awareness from pushing papers." "You think she's lying about her background?" Fletcher frowned, trying to articulate intuition that didn't quite form coherent argument. "I think there's more to her story than what's in her official file. Why would someone with serious tactical training hide it and work admin?" That was the question Fletcher couldn't answer. What possible reason would a competent operator have for deliberately choosing the lowest status position on base? It violated every principle of military careerism, contradicted the whole culture of credential seeking and rank advancement, unless she was running from something, unless she had reasons to stay invisible that had nothing to do with career aspirations. In high-stakes environments like FOB Copper, equipment failure isn't an option. Military personnel rely on ruggedized computing systems built to withstand extreme conditions. dust, heat, shock, and constant deployment stress. These aren't your standard commercial laptops. We're talking military specification hardware with encrypted storage, reinforced chassis designed to survive drops from 6 feet, and battery systems that last through extended operations. When your work involves classified data and mission-critical information, you need technology that won't fail when it matters most. Advanced thermal management, spill-resistant keyboards, and tamper-evident security features ensure operational integrity in the field. The days accumulated into routine, Willow processing paperwork with quiet efficiency, Fletcher watching her with increasing suspicion, the base settling into the rhythms of deployment life. But beneath the surface, pressure was building, small incidents compounding into pattern recognition. Lieutenant Colonel Albert Price, the base executive officer, called an emergency meeting at 1400 hours on Thursday. Security breach suspected in personnel file systems. Classified information potentially compromised. The S1 office, Willow's domain, was ground zero for the investigation. Price stood at the front of the small conference room, his 48 years showing in the gray threading through his high and tight haircut. His authority conveyed through rigid posture and clipped speech. We have reason to believe someone with admin access has been probing classified files. This is a serious breach of operational security. Liam Turner shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Chloe looked confused. Willow remained perfectly still, her expression neutral. Until we determine the source, all admin personnel are under scrutiny. Your access is restricted to essential functions only. Price's gaze swept across them with the kind of institutional suspicion that treated everyone as guilty until proven otherwise. If anyone has information about irregular file access, now would be the time to speak up. Silence. Hart. Price focused on Willow with particular intensity. You've been accessing files outside your normal duty scope. Care to explain why? Routine audits, sir. Audits? Checking for data integrity issues after we upgraded the security protocols last month. Routine audits aren't your responsibility. That's its domain. Yes, sir. I thought I was being proactive. Price's expression hardened. Proactive looks a lot like suspicious from where I'm standing. You're confined to basic data entry until further notice. No system administration, no security protocols, no initiative. It was a professional slapdown, delivered in front of her peers, designed to establish dominance and discourage further proactive behavior. Willow accepted it with the same neutral expression she'd maintained throughout the meeting. Understood, sir. After the meeting, Liam caught up with her in the hallway. That was harsh. Price really has it out for admin staff. He's doing his job. Willow kept walking, her pace steady. Doesn't it bother you, being treated like a suspect? Bothering me doesn't change the situation. She reached her desk, began organizing files for the restricted access she'd been assigned. Complaining wastes energy. Liam studied her with genuine confusion. You're seriously weird, Hart. Most people would at least be mad. But Willow had learned long ago that anger was a luxury operators couldn't afford. Emotion clouded judgment, compromised operational effectiveness, created vulnerabilities that hostile actors could exploit. She'd spent 8 years in environments where showing frustration meant losing critical information, where maintaining perfect emotional control was the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Price's accusation was nothing compared to Syrian interrogators. His authority was performative compared to real threats she'd faced. So, she filed papers and waited for the investigation to run its course and kept her head down like the good admin clerk everyone assumed she was. That evening, Copper's Corner buzzed with speculation about the security breach. Who'd done it? What were they after? Was it insider threat or external penetration? The theories multiplied with each retelling, growing more elaborate as soldiers traded hypotheses over coffee and care package cookies. Willow sat in her usual corner, tablet open to deployment schedules, listening without participating. Information flowed around her like water around stone. She absorbed everything, revealed nothing, maintained the perfect cover of administrative background noise. Chief Warrant Officer Ronan Drake entered at 1900 hours, his intelligence officer bearing immediately distinguishing him from the infantry crowd. 35 years old, former enlisted turned warrant, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who dealt in secrets professionally. His gaze found Willow almost immediately, studied her for a moment longer than casual interest would warrant, then moved to the coffee station. But he had noticed something. Willow could tell from the slight shift in his body language, the way his attention had sharpened when he'd looked at her. Intelligence officers developed instincts for inconsistency, and she'd apparently triggered his professional curiosity. She needed to be more careful. Fletcher approached her table, Forrester trailing behind him like a particularly loyal shadow. "Hart, can we talk?" "We're talking now." Willow didn't look up from her tablet. "About your range performance. About the way you handled yourself during the mortar attack. About—" He paused, searching for diplomatic phrasing. "About whether you're being entirely honest about your background." Now she did look up, meeting his gaze with eyes that had stared down far more dangerous interrogators. "My service record is available through official channels. If you have questions about my background, submit a request through your chain of command." "I'm not making an official inquiry, I'm just curious." "Curiosity isn't my problem, Sergeant." Fletcher's jaw tightened. He was used to people being intimidated by his size, his rank, his combat experience. Willow's complete indifference to all of it clearly bothered him more than outright defiance would have. "You know what I think?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think you're hiding something. I think there's more to Willow Hart than admin clerk, and eventually I'm going to figure out what it is. Good luck with that." She returned her attention to the tablet, dismissing him with the kind of casual authority that had nothing to do with rank structure. Fletcher stood there for another moment, visibly struggling with whether to escalate or retreat. Finally, he chose retreat, but his expression promised this conversation wasn't finished. Ronan Drake watched the exchange from across the room, his intelligence officer instincts clearly triggered by the dynamics he'd witnessed. After Fletcher departed, he approached Willow's table with coffee in hand and a carefully neutral expression. "Mind if I sit?" "Free country. Free table." He sat, sipped his coffee, studied her with the kind of analytical gaze she recognized from her own training. "Fletcher's right about one thing. You don't match your file. That's an interesting accusation from someone who doesn't know me. I'm not accusing, I'm observing." He set down his coffee, leaned back in his chair with deliberate casualness. "I ran your service record through standard verification protocols. Everything checks out on paper. Direct entry into admin specialty, no prior service, current deployment your first rotation. But there's something about you that doesn't align with that narrative." "And what would that be?" "The way you move. The situational awareness that's constant even when you think nobody's watching. The threat assessment habits that have nothing to do with filing paperwork." He paused. "I've worked with enough special operations personnel to recognize certain patterns. You have those patterns." Willow's expression didn't change, but something cold settled in her chest. Ronan Drake was more dangerous than Fletcher because he was more perceptive, more systematic in his analysis, less likely to be dismissed or distracted. "I take security seriously," she said carefully. "Situational awareness is just good practice in a combat zone." "True," he nodded. "But most people develop that awareness gradually through deployment experience. Yours seems fully formed, like you arrived with it already integrated into your behavioral baseline. Maybe I'm a fast learner. Maybe." He finished his coffee, stood to leave. "Or maybe you're exactly what your file says you are, and I'm seeing patterns that don't exist. Either way, I'm going to run some deeper background checks, just routine verification, nothing personal." "Do what you need to do." Willow met his gaze without blinking. "My record will say the same thing tomorrow as it did yesterday." After he left, she allowed herself 30 seconds of genuine concern. Ronan Drake had access to databases that went deeper than standard personnel files. If he pushed hard enough, if he had the right clearances, he might find the redacted sections that would raise serious questions. The cover story would hold. It had been designed by people far more experienced in operational security than one warrant officer at a forward operating base. But the scrutiny itself was problematic. Every investigation created risk. Every question invited additional attention. She'd chosen FUB Copper specifically because it was boring, remote, staffed with conventional forces who had no connection to special operations communities. The activity didn't operate here. Ghost Unit 7 had no presence in this theater. She was supposed to be invisible, but invisibility only worked if nobody looked directly at you. And Fletcher Kane, Martha Quinn, and now Ronan Drake were all looking. The next morning brought another complication. Willow arrived at the S1 office to find Lieutenant Colonel Price waiting at her desk, his expression suggesting this conversation wouldn't improve her day. "Hart, we've completed the preliminary investigation into the security breach." Yes, sir. The intrusion came from an external source. Your audit work actually helped us identify the penetration vector. He paused, clearly uncomfortable with the admission. You were right to be proactive. I was wrong to shut you down. It was as close to an apology as field-grade officers typically managed. Willow accepted it with professional grace. Understood, sir. Glad I could help. The thing is, Price shifted his weight, still uncomfortable. Your analysis of the breach showed technical knowledge I wouldn't expect from admin personnel. You identified SCIF protocol violations, Tempest shielding inadequacies, and network security gaps that our IT specialists missed. I read the manuals thoroughly, sir. Nobody reads Tempest specifications for recreational purposes, specialist. His gaze sharpened. Where did you actually learn this material? The interrogation room in Damascus had been smaller than Price's office, hotter, filled with men who asked questions with far more violent intent. Willow had maintained cover through worse. Professional development, sir, online courses, technical manuals, self-study. I take my job seriously. Price didn't look entirely convinced, but he lacked evidence to push further. Well, whatever your methods, your work prevented a significant breach. I'm restoring your full access and recommending you for a commendation. Thank you, sir. Not necessary, but appreciated. After he left, Liam turned from his terminal with undisguised amazement. How did you pull that off? Price never admits he's wrong, and he definitely never thanks junior personnel. I did the work spoke for itself. But the technical knowledge, where did you really learn that? Willow didn't answer. She just pulled up her files and resumed the careful performance of administrative competence that had kept her cover intact for 6 months. Except the cover was degrading. Too many people asking too many questions. Too many small demonstrations of capability that didn't align with her official narrative. If you're hooked on this story, smash that like button. Willow's secrets are starting to surface, and trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. The next revelation will change everything Fletcher thought he knew about admin clerks. Drop a comment. Have you ever been completely wrong about someone? Let's keep this momentum going. By 1400 hours, the base temperature had climbed past 112 degrees, driving most personnel into climate-controlled spaces. Willow worked through lunch, processing deployment paperwork with the kind of focused efficiency that allowed her mind to drift while her hands maintained productive output. The encrypted phone in her footlocker remained silent. 2 years of silence. 2 years of peace. 2 years of trying to be someone other than the operator who'd lost her team in Syria. But peace was fragile. Cover stories were temporary. Eventually, everyone's past caught up with them. Major Hugo Barnes entered the S1 office at 1500 hours, his operations officer authority evident in his bearing. 40 years old, career infantry, he carried himself with the professional competence of someone who had spent 2 decades managing complex tactical problems. Hart, I need your assistance with something. Willow looked up from her terminal. Yes, sir. How can I help? We're running a tactical planning exercise tomorrow. Hypothetical scenario involving personnel extraction under hostile conditions. Lieutenant Colonel Price suggested you might have useful input on operational security protocols. It was a trap. Not malicious. Barnes seemed genuinely interested in her expertise, but still a trap. Any meaningful contribution to tactical planning would further contradict her cover story, would raise additional questions about how an admin clerk understood operational security at that level. I'm happy to help however I can, sir, though I'm not sure what value I'd add to tactical planning. Price says you demonstrated sophisticated understanding of security protocols during the breach investigation. That kind of systematic thinking could be useful for exercise design. He paused. Unless you're not comfortable operating outside your normal scope. Professional challenge. Subtle, but effective. Declining would look like incompetence. Accepting would expose more capability. She chose the middle path. I can review the exercise parameters and provide administrative feedback on protocol compliance. That's within my expertise. Perfect. Conference room, 0900 tomorrow. Barnes smiled. Appreciate your flexibility. After he left, Chloe whispered across their shared workspace. You just got voluntold for planning committee. That's usually reserved for actual operational staff. Apparently my security audit made an impression. Be careful. The more you help, the more they'll ask. Eventually you'll be doing everyone's job while they take credit. It was good advice from someone who understood military bureaucracy's exploitative tendencies. But Willow's concern wasn't about credit. It was about maintaining the increasingly fragile cover between who she was and who she'd been. That evening at Copper's Corner, the social dynamics had shifted in subtle but noticeable ways. Where previously Willow had been dismissed or ignored, now she attracted a different kind of attention. Respect, tinged with curiosity. Questions about her background that probed just carefully enough to avoid seeming invasive. Blake Summers approached her table with the nervous energy of youth seeking mentorship. "Ma'am, I heard you helped solve the security breach. That's incredible. Just did my job. But the technical knowledge you used, that's not standard admin training, right? Where'd you learn that?" It was the same question everyone kept asking, variations on a theme that threatened to unravel everything. Self-study, professional development, reading technical manuals. The script was wearing thin even to her own ears. "Information is available if you look for it. Could you teach me? I mean, if you have time. I want to understand security protocols better." Willow studied the young private, earnest, eager, genuinely interested in learning rather than interrogating. The kind of soldier she'd have recruited for her team in another life, someone with curiosity and drive, and the humility to ask for help. "I can point you toward resources, but you'll have to do the reading yourself." "That's perfect. Thank you, ma'am." He retreated with the satisfied energy of someone who'd received validation. Willow returned to her tablet, but the interaction had triggered memories she'd been suppressing. Training junior operators, building teams, developing talent in service of missions that mattered. She'd been good at it, better than good, exceptional. Her teams had posted success rates that attracted attention from the highest levels of special operations community. She'd built a reputation as someone who could execute impossible missions with minimal resources. And then Syria had shattered everything. Across the room, Ronan Drake worked his own tablet with the focused intensity that suggested he was conducting the background investigation he'd promised. Willow didn't watch him directly. That would be too obvious. But she tracked his presence through peripheral awareness, cataloged his occasional glances in her direction, noted when he stepped outside to make a phone call. 20 minutes later, he returned, his expression carefully neutral, but his body language suggesting he'd learned something significant. He didn't approach her table, didn't acknowledge her presence, just resumed his work with the kind of deliberate casualness that screamed intelligence officer trying not to look suspicious. Willow's training kicked in automatically. Assess threat level, calculate exposure, prepare contingencies. Whatever Ronan had discovered, it was enough to concern him, but apparently not enough to take immediate action. Which meant her cover had cracks, but wasn't completely compromised. Yet. Fletcher entered at 19:30 hours, Forrester in tow as always, both of them looking like they'd spent the afternoon conducting their own investigation. They bypassed the coffee station and headed straight for Willow's table. "We need to talk," Fletcher announced without preamble. "And this time I want real answers." Willow set down her tablet, met his gaze with the kind of patient neutrality that had survived far more aggressive interrogations. "What's your question, Sergeant?" "Who are you, really?" "Specialist Willow Hart, admin clerk, S1 personnel office." "That's what your file says, but files can be constructed, cover stories can be created. I've seen it before. People with classified backgrounds who need administrative positions to maintain cover for other operations." He was closer to truth than he realized, but his hypothesis was backwards. She wasn't using admin work as cover for ongoing operations. She was using it as escape from operations that had destroyed her. "That's an interesting theory," she said carefully. "Do you have any evidence to support it?" "The way you move, the skills you've demonstrated, the technical knowledge that has nothing to do with admin training." Fletcher leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I ran your name through some contacts I have in special operations community. Nobody's heard of you, which is exactly what I'd expect if you were operating under a cover identity. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of presence, Sergeant. Maybe nobody's heard of me because I'm exactly what I appear to be, an unremarkable admin clerk doing unremarkable work. You're a lot of things, Hart. Unremarkable isn't one of them." It was almost a compliment, buried under layers of suspicion and frustrated curiosity. Willow recognized the pattern. Fletcher was someone who needed answers, who couldn't let mysteries exist unresolved, who would keep pushing until he either discovered truth or created enough chaos that truth became irrelevant. "I appreciate your thoroughness," she said, "but you're chasing shadows. Sometimes people are just competent at their jobs without having secret backgrounds." Forrester spoke up for the first time. The shooting, though, that was more than competent. That was trained. Basic marksmanship is part of military training for everyone. I took it seriously during qualification. Nobody takes it that seriously. Fletcher's frustration was evident now. Look, I'm not trying to compromise operational security. If you're working some classified angle, I'll back off. Just tell me I'm right, and I'll drop it. But giving him that satisfaction would create more problems than it solved. Confirmation would trigger additional questions, would spread speculation through the base, would eventually reach people with clearances high enough to access her redacted files. You're not right, she said flatly. You're chasing a narrative that doesn't exist because you can't accept that admin personnel might be competent. That's your problem, not mine. It was calculated to sting, to redirect his frustration from mystery to ego. Fletcher's jaw tightened, his pride wounded by the implication that he was being professionally dismissive rather than legitimately investigative. Fine, he stood abruptly. Keep your secrets, but eventually everyone's cover breaks. I'll be watching when yours does. He stalked off, Forrester following dutifully. Across the room, Ronan Drake had observed the entire exchange with the kind of analytical attention that suggested he was cataloging every detail for future reference. Willow returned to her tablet, maintaining perfect composure despite the growing certainty that her carefully constructed invisibility was collapsing. Too many questions from too many directions. The math was simple. Increased scrutiny multiplied by extended timeline equaled inevitable exposure. She had maybe 2 weeks before someone with sufficient clearance and motivation dug deep enough to find the redacted sections of her file. And once those sections were exposed, questions would multiply exponentially. Why was an ISA operator working admin at an insignificant FOB? What mission had ended badly enough to warrant deep cover retirement? Why had Ghost Unit 7 allowed one of their most effective operators to disappear into administrative obscurity? The answers to those questions led directly back to Syria, to August 21st, 2021, to the mission that had killed 2 of her team and compromised intelligence networks across 3 countries, to the failure that had ended her career and nearly broken her completely. Transitioning from military service to civilian life requires careful financial planning. Specialized investment advisors who understand military benefits, VA loan programs, and service member retirement accounts can make a critical difference. These aren't generic financial planners. They're experts in TSP optimization, understanding how deployment pay affects long-term savings, and maximizing veteran-specific tax advantages. Whether you're on active duty planning for retirement or already separated from service, having someone who speaks your language and understands military compensation structures helps you build real wealth. Strategic planning today means financial security tomorrow. 2,200 hours. Most of FOB Copper had secured for the night, leaving only essential personnel and insomniacs still moving through the compound. Willow returned to her quarters, found Chloe already asleep, and conducted her evening routine with the mechanical precision that had become second nature. Shower, equipment check, weapons maintenance on the M9 pistol she was authorized to carry despite her admin status, the only official concession to her actual background. Tomorrow's tactical planning meeting with Major Barnes. Continued scrutiny from Fletcher, Ronan, and an expanding circle of curious personnel. The pressure was building towards some kind of release. She could feel it with the same certainty she'd once felt approaching ambushes. Environmental indicators aligning into pattern recognition, threat assessment calculations reaching concerning probability thresholds. Something was coming. Some confrontation or revelation that would force her hand, would explode the careful cover she'd maintained for 6 months. The encrypted phone in her footlocker remained silent, but Willow pulled it out anyway, stared at the blank screen for long minutes. Ghost Unit 7 was gone. The activity had moved on. Her operational career had ended in Syrian dust and American blood. But operational skills never completely disappeared. They waited, dormant, ready to resurface when circumstances demanded. And circumstances were demanding more every day. She replaced the phone, secured her footlocker, tried to sleep despite knowing dreams would take her back to Damascus. To the safe house where everything went wrong. To the moment she'd realized the intelligence was compromised and the team was walking into a trap. To Adam and Michelle, the 2 operators she'd lost because she'd trusted the wrong source. Some wounds never healed. Some failures never faded. You just learned to carry them quietly enough that nobody else could see the weight. Tomorrow she'd attend the tactical planning meeting and try to contribute without revealing too much. She'd maintain her admin clerk performance and hope Fletcher's investigation ran into bureaucratic walls. She'd trust that Ronan Drake's background check would be stonewalled by the same classification barriers that had protected her for 2 years. She'd continue the careful performance of invisibility for as long as the cover held. We're approaching the moment that will shatter everything. If you want to see Fletcher's reaction when the truth comes out, share this video right now. The algorithm needs to know this story matters. Comment below. What do you think Willow's real background is? Your engagement keeps these stories coming. But as Willow finally drifted toward uneasy sleep, she knew with operational certainty that the cover was degrading faster than she could repair it. And when it finally broke, when someone pushed hard enough, or asked the right questions, or simply got lucky with database access, the revelation would transform everything. Fletcher Kane wanted answers. Soon enough, he'd get more than he could possibly handle. The question was whether Willow was ready to become visible again, whether she could survive the exposure of wounds she'd spent 2 years trying to heal, whether returning to who she'd been was worth abandoning who she'd tried to become. Tomorrow would bring her one day closer to finding out. 0900 hours arrived with desert heat already climbing past 100 degrees. Willow entered the Tactical Operations Center conference room to find Major Hugo Barnes setting up digital displays showing hypothetical terrain, maps of valleys and ridgelines projected across multiple screens in high-resolution detail. Fletcher and 3 other infantry NCOs occupied chairs along one wall, their presence suggesting Barnes had expanded the planning exercise beyond simple administrative review. This was significantly worse than Willow had anticipated. Not a straightforward protocol review, but an actual tactical planning session where any meaningful contribution would expose capabilities far beyond admin scope. She had walked into a trap, and retreat would look more suspicious than participation. "Hart, thanks for joining us." Barnes gestured to an empty chair near the center of the room. "I've brought in some of our senior combat personnel to stress test the exercise design. Your security expertise should help identify vulnerabilities in the extraction scenario." Fletcher's eyes tracked her with predatory focus. He'd engineered this somehow, convinced Barnes to create a situation where she'd either reveal tactical knowledge or look incompetent, refusing to contribute. A carefully constructed trap disguised as professional opportunity. Barnes outlined the scenario with methodical precision. 12 personnel trapped behind enemy lines after reconnaissance mission compromised, limited extraction windows due to weather patterns, hostile forces with sophisticated surveillance capabilities and anti-aircraft systems, standard special operations problem set, the kind of exercise designed to test planning under severe constraints and competing priorities. Initial thoughts? Barnes looked around the room. How do we approach extraction with these parameters? The infantry NCOs offered conventional responses: air extraction under cover of darkness, ground convoy with armored support, wait for surveillance gaps and exploit them with rapid insertion extraction. Solid tactics, but predictable. The kind of solutions that worked in training environments but got people killed in actual operations, where enemy forces anticipated standard doctrine. Willow stayed silent, watching the discussion unfold, calculating precisely how much she could contribute without triggering additional scrutiny. Every word would be analyzed, every insight measured against what admin clerks were supposed to know. "Hart," Barnes prompted after 10 minutes of discussion, "you've been quiet. Administrative perspective on operational security protocols?" She could deflect, offer generic observations about protocol compliance and documentation requirements, stay safely within her cover story, and maintain the administrative performance she'd sustained for 6 months. But something about the scenario bothered her. The enemy surveillance capabilities Barnes had described matched specific patterns from actual operations she'd run in Syria. The terrain features, the hostile force composition, the communications infrastructure, this wasn't purely hypothetical. This was based on real intelligence about real threat networks in active theaters, which meant someone on this base had access to classified operational intelligence at levels that should have triggered security review, which meant the security breach Lieutenant Colonel Price had investigated might be significantly more serious than anyone realized, might be ongoing rather than contained. "The scenario assumes enemy surveillance is passive observation," Willow said carefully, choosing each word with tactical precision. But sophisticated networks don't just observe, they actively deceive. If I were running hostile intelligence operations, I'd create false extraction corridors specifically designed to channel rescue forces into pre-positioned ambush zones. The room went completely quiet. Fletcher leaned forward, his attention sharpening like predator recognizing wounded prey. Barnes studied her with renewed interest that carried professional assessment rather than casual curiosity. Go on, explain your tactical reasoning. Any obvious extraction route becomes a trap by definition. The enemy knows we have limited options given the terrain constraints and weather windows. They'll monitor those options and prepare accordingly. The only viable approach is to assume all intelligence is compromised from the start and design the operation around unexpected vectors that deliberately violate standard tactical doctrine. That's advanced operational theory, one of the infantry NCOs observed, his tone carrying skepticism mixed with genuine curiosity. Where exactly did an admin clerk learn about hostile deception networks and counter-surveillance tactics? Willow had walked directly into the trap she'd been trying to avoid, but retreating now would look worse than pressing forward with partial truth. Professional reading, case studies from historical operations. Post-action reviews are publicly available if you research thoroughly enough. What case studies specifically? Fletcher's tone was surgically casual, but his question was designed to trap, demanding specificity that would either expose the depth of her knowledge or force her to admit fabrication. She met his gaze with deliberate calm, calculating the least damaging response. Mogadishu, October 93, the ground convoy to the Olympic Hotel. Enemy forces successfully channeled the rescue attempt through pre-planned kill zones using false intelligence about route security and deliberately created gaps in their defensive positions. It was real history, publicly available information that any motivated researcher could access. But the way she described it, the operational terminology, the strategic analysis, the intimate understanding of how deception operations worked at tactical level, revealed understanding that came from professional military education far beyond basic admin training. Barnes was studying her now with the kind of analytical intensity that suggested he was completely reassessing everything he thought he knew about Willow Hart. The quiet admin clerk who filed paperwork and answered phones had just demonstrated strategic thinking, consistent with advanced special operations planning. Your analysis is tactically sound and operationally mature, he said slowly, carefully, which raises an interesting question about how you develop that level of tactical sophistication without corresponding operational experience on your service record. Willow had maybe 3 seconds to decide, maintain the increasingly implausible cover story that was degrading under sustained scrutiny, or acknowledge capabilities that would trigger immediate investigation into her classified background. She chose tactical retreat executed with professional precision. I apologize if I overstepped my scope, sir. You asked for input, and I provided observations based on available historical information. If I've exceeded my appropriate advisory boundaries, I'll defer to personnel with actual operational experience and combat credentials. It was a masterclass in professional deflection, acknowledging the boundary while not quite admitting she'd crossed it, using appropriate military deference to redirect attention away from uncomfortable questions. Barnes nodded slowly, accepting the deflection at surface level, but the questions in his expression hadn't diminished at all. The planning session continued for another 90 minutes, Willow carefully restricting her contributions to purely administrative observations, while the infantry NCOs developed an extraction plan that she knew with operational certainty would fail catastrophically in real-world execution. They had overlooked 3 critical vulnerabilities, ignored 2 fundamental deception indicators, and based their approach on assumptions about enemy capabilities that hostile forces would exploit ruthlessly. But pointing out those flaws would require explaining precisely why she knew they were flaws, which would require admitting operational experience she wasn't supposed to possess. So, she stayed silent and watched them design a mission that would get people killed, and felt the familiar weight of knowledge she couldn't use settling across her shoulders like physical burden she'd carried too many times before. After the meeting concluded, Fletcher intercepted her in the hallway outside the TOC, positioning his larger frame to block her path with body language that communicated this conversation wasn't optional. That was remarkably impressive, he said, voice low enough not to carry to other personnel moving through the corridor. For someone who claims to have no tactical background, You demonstrated remarkably sophisticated understanding of hostile deception networks and counter-surveillance operations. I read extensively, Sergeant. I already explained that. You know what I think? Fletcher leaned closer, his infantry NCO intensity focused entirely on her. I think you've personally run operations exactly like the one we just discussed. I think you've planned extractions under hostile surveillance and dealt with compromised intelligence networks in actual combat environments. I think everything about your cover story is carefully constructed fiction designed to hide operational background you don't want exposed. He was completely right, of course, but confirmation would destroy the fragile peace she'd built over 6 months of careful performance. Think whatever you want, Sergeant. Your theories don't change my official service record. Service records can be falsified by people with sufficient resources and motivation. Backgrounds can be professionally constructed. I've seen it before in the special operations community. People who need administrative cover for classified activities they can't officially acknowledge. Then submit your concerns through official channels. If you genuinely believe I'm operating under false pretenses, there are established procedures for security investigation. Fletcher's jaw tightened with visible frustration. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll request formal background verification through intelligence channels. Please do. Willow stepped around him with controlled movement, maintaining professional detachment that had sustained her through far worse confrontations. I'm sure Lieutenant Colonel Price would be absolutely fascinated by your theories about admin clerks running covert operations. She walked away before he could formulate response, but the encounter had shifted something fundamental in the ongoing investigation of her background. Fletcher wasn't just curious anymore. He was actively hostile, personally invested in proving deception, determined to expose whatever operational truth she was hiding, which meant the timeline for complete cover collapse had accelerated dramatically beyond her ability to manage it. The afternoon brought another significant complication that threatened to unravel everything. Willow returned to the S1 office to find Chief Warrant Officer Ronan Drake waiting at her desk, tablet in hand, an expression carefully neutral in the way intelligence officers had of appearing casual while conducting interrogation. Specialist Hart, do you have a moment for private conversation? Of course, sir. He gestured toward the small conference room adjacent to the main office, private space away from curious listeners and potential witnesses. Warning bells triggered in Willow's operational awareness, but she followed him calmly, maintaining the administrative performance even as tactical instincts cataloged exit routes and threat potential. Ronan closed the door with deliberate care, set his tablet on the table between them, and studied her with the kind of analytical intensity that suggested this conversation would be significantly more dangerous than Fletcher's confrontational approach. I've been running standard background verification on base personnel, he began with professional directness. Routine intelligence officer due diligence, nothing unusual about the process itself. But your file presents some interesting anomalies that don't align with typical service patterns. What kind of anomalies, sir? Your service record is remarkably clean, almost suspiciously so. No disciplinary issues whatsoever, no medical incidents requiring documentation, no performance concerns or negative counseling. You appeared in the personnel system approximately 18 months ago with a complete administrative background and absolutely no prior service history. That's entirely consistent with direct entry into admin specialty, sir. It is, Ronan nodded, acknowledging the surface logic. Except direct entry recruits typically have documented civilian employment histories, educational records from accredited institutions, social media presence across multiple platforms. You have literally none of that. It's as if Willow Hart didn't exist at all before she enlisted in the United States Army. The analysis was disturbingly accurate and potentially catastrophic. Ronan had identified exactly the kind of red flags that should trigger immediate counterintelligence investigation. I value personal privacy, sir. Minimal social media presence isn't particularly unusual for people of my generation who prioritize information security. Operational security. Ronan smiled slightly, catching the linguistic slip. That's an interesting word choice for an admin clerk concerned about personal privacy. She'd made another critical mistake. Let operational vocabulary slip through the civilian cover she was supposed to maintain consistently. Information security, she corrected quickly. I meant information security in the general sense. Of course you did. His tone suggested he didn't believe the correction at all. Here's what I think is actually happening, Hart. I think you're former military with a highly classified background who needed administrative cover for reasons I'm not currently cleared to understand. The records are suspiciously clean because they were professionally constructed by people with institutional resources to create convincing documentation. That's quite an elaborate theory, sir. It's the only theory that adequately explains all the available evidence. Your tactical knowledge that exceeds your supposed training, your constant threat awareness that goes far beyond deployment caution, your complete lack of verifiable personal history prior to enlistment. He paused for emphasis. I'm not trying to compromise operational security if you're working some classified mission. If that's the case, just tell me, and I'll route my concerns through appropriate intelligence channels. It was essentially the same offer Fletcher had made, but infinitely more sophisticated and correspondingly more dangerous. Ronan had the intelligence background to actually verify his suspicions, the security clearances to access databases that might reveal carefully redacted portions of her service record. I genuinely appreciate your thoroughness, sir, but you're constructing elaborate narratives from insufficient data points. Sometimes people are simply private individuals. Sometimes admin clerks take professional development seriously. Sometimes the simplest explanation actually is the correct one. And sometimes the simplest explanation is deliberately constructed cover for something significantly more complex. Ronan leaned back slightly, analytical gaze never wavering. I'm going to continue my investigation through official channels. If your record is completely legitimate, you have absolutely nothing to worry about. If it's not, well, I'm exceptionally good at finding inconsistencies in professionally constructed cover documentation. It was a professional threat delivered without personal malice, but with absolute certainty of eventual success. Ronan would keep systematically digging until he either confirmed his operational suspicions or completely exhausted his investigative resources. And given his intelligence officer clearances and institutional access, resource exhaustion would come long after uncomfortable exposure. Willow maintained her carefully composed expression, despite the cold certainty settling deeper in her chest. The cover was collapsing faster than she could possibly repair it. Multiple investigations from multiple directions, all independently converging toward the same classified truth she'd been desperately trying to escape for 2 years. Do whatever you need to do, sir. My record will stand up to any legitimate scrutiny. But they both understood that was only partially accurate. The surface credentials would absolutely hold. Her current admin assignment was genuine. Her present service record was completely accurate. But beneath that carefully maintained surface lay 8 years of operations so highly classified that even acknowledging their existence was compartmented, missions that had never officially happened, an entire career that had been deliberately erased to facilitate her retirement into administrative obscurity. If Ronan pushed deep enough with sufficient clearance, he'd inevitably hit those extensive redactions. And redactions always created more dangerous questions than they could possibly answer. That evening, Copper's Corner buzzed with unusual energy and barely contained speculation. Word had spread rapidly about the tactical planning session, about Willow's surprisingly sophisticated analysis, about Fletcher's growing conviction that she was hiding significant operational background. Speculation multiplied with each enthusiastic retelling, theories becoming progressively more elaborate as soldiers traded competing hypotheses over coffee and care package cookies. Willow sat at her usual corner table, tablet open to routine personnel schedules, trying desperately to maintain the performance of administrative normalcy while acutely aware that every single eye in the crowded room tracked her movements with renewed curiosity and emerging suspicion. Captain Sabira Cross approached with uncharacteristic directness, her logistics officer confidence somehow transformed into something approaching professional respect. Hart, I want to apologize sincerely for my earlier dismissive comments about support personnel. Major Barnes specifically told me about your strategic contributions to the tactical planning session. That level of operational thinking deserves genuine recognition, regardless of specialty designation. It was a carefully constructed professional olive branch, offered publicly enough to carry significant social weight within the tight-knit military community. Willow accepted it with the same neutral courtesy she reflexively applied to virtually everything. No apology is necessary, ma'am. We all serve according to our individual capabilities and assignments. Still, I made inappropriate assumptions based purely on specialty rather than demonstrated competence. That was unprofessional conduct unbecoming of an officer. Sabira hesitated momentarily, then added with genuine curiosity, "Where did you actually learn that kind of sophisticated operational analysis?" Even the carefully delivered apology came with pointed interrogation. Everyone wanted answers to fundamentally the same question. Endless variations on the persistent theme that threatened to completely unravel everything she'd worked to protect. Self-study and dedicated professional development, ma'am. The educational resources are readily available if you invest sufficient time and genuine effort. Sabira didn't look remotely satisfied with the deflection, but she nodded politely and retreated to rejoin her logistics personnel. Across the room, Fletcher watched the entire exchange with barely concealed frustration, clearly bothered that Willow continued expertly deflecting increasingly pointed questions without ever quite lying outright. Sergeant First Class Martha Quinn slid smoothly into the chair directly across from Willow, medical NCO instincts apparently sensing the steadily building pressure that threatened to explode. "You're handling this remarkably well," she observed quietly, voice pitched for privacy. "Most people would completely crack under this intensity of sustained scrutiny. There's nothing particularly difficult to handle. I'm simply doing my assigned job." "Sure you are." Martha's knowing smile carried zero judgment. "And I'm just a medic who happens to notice significant behavioral details. Like the way you automatically scan every entrance with tactical precision, the way you consistently position yourself with clear sight lines to multiple exits, the way your hands instinctively move to defensive positions when people approach unexpectedly from behind." Willow forced herself to consciously relax posture she hadn't even realized had tensed defensively. Martha was far too observant, far too experienced with combat stress patterns, far too familiar with operational psychology to be easily deceived by surface performance. Deployment habits develop naturally, ma'am. Everyone develops some degree of heightened awareness when serving in active combat zones. Not like yours, they don't. Yours is professionally trained, deeply integrated, completely automatic. The kind of ingrained awareness that comes from years of high-risk operations, where momentary lack of vigilance literally meant immediate death. Martha leaned forward slightly, voice softening with unexpected empathy. "I'm not trying to expose you or compromise whatever operational security you're protecting. I'm trying to understand you as a human being, because whatever psychological burden you're carrying, it's extraordinarily heavy, and you're carrying it completely alone." The unexpected genuine empathy hit significantly harder than aggressive interrogation possibly could. Willow had carefully prepared for hostility, for professional investigation, for competitive challenge from threatened peers. She absolutely hadn't prepared for sincere human concern offered without apparent agenda. "I genuinely appreciate that perspective, but there's really nothing complicated to understand. I'm exactly what I appear to be. If you sincerely believe that, then I'll respect your position." Martha stood to leave, then paused deliberately. "But if you ever need someone safe to talk to, someone who absolutely won't judge or investigate or spread gossip, my door is always open." Sometimes psychological weight gets measurably lighter when you finally share it with someone who understands. She walked away before Willow could formulate appropriate response, leaving behind an offer of unconditional support that felt simultaneously dangerous to her operational security and desperately needed for her deteriorating mental health. The next morning brought absolute catastrophe that shattered any remaining illusion of control. Willow arrived at the S1 office at precisely 0700 hours to find Lieutenant Colonel Price standing in the middle of the workspace with an expression suggesting extremely serious problems requiring immediate response. "Critical security breach," Price announced without preamble to the assembled admin staff. Someone accessed highly classified personnel files overnight using compromised admin credentials. The intrusion was remarkably sophisticated, specifically targeted personnel with special operations backgrounds and successfully exfiltrated encrypted data before our security systems detected the ongoing penetration. Willow's threat assessment capabilities kicked into immediate automatic analysis mode. The breach absolutely wasn't random opportunistic hacking. Someone was systematically hunting for specific information about classified personnel currently stationed at FOB Copper, possibly hunting for detailed information about her specifically. "What categories of files were successfully accessed, sir?" she asked with professional directness. Price's gaze sharpened noticeably. "That's strictly need-to-know information, specialist. Sir, if admin credentials were definitively compromised, S1 office security protocols require immediate comprehensive review. I cannot effectively help secure the vulnerable systems if I don't understand specifically what categories of information were targeted by hostile actors. It was entirely logical argument delivered with professional calm that suggested technical expertise rather than personal concern. Price considered for a measured moment, then nodded acknowledgement. Files specifically related to personnel with special operations backgrounds documented in their service records. More precisely, anyone with unusual classification markers flagging portions of their personnel files. Direct confirmation. Someone, whether internal threat or sophisticated external penetration, was specifically hunting for special operations personnel currently stationed at this forward operating base. And given the suspicious timing immediately following Price's formal inquiry about her background, the breach was almost certainly directly connected to her documented presence. She'd been systematically compromised. Not just her carefully constructed cover story, her actual physical location had been successfully identified by hostile actors who desperately wanted detailed information about IC operations and personnel. "We need to implement immediate emergency security protocols, sir," Willow said, operational training completely overriding her careful admin performance in the face of genuine crisis. "Assume all electronic communication systems are comprehensively compromised. Immediately rotate all access credentials across the board. Implement mandatory multi-factor authentication on absolutely all classified systems, without exception. And comprehensively flag any personnel file access attempts for the past 72 hours minimum to systematically identify the precise penetration vector." Price stared at her with undisguised shock. "That's absolutely not admin-level security knowledge, Hart. That's sophisticated signals intelligence and professional counterintelligence protocol you just described." She'd done it again. Let operational expertise completely override her cover story in a critical moment of genuine crisis response. But the security breach was far too serious to maintain careful performance while hostile actors successfully exfiltrated potentially life-threatening classified data. "Sir, with all due respect, the current tactical situation requires immediate decisive action. We can certainly discuss my apparently unusual knowledge base after we successfully secure the compromised systems against further penetration." For one long measured moment, Price looked like he would immediately press the uncomfortable question. Then professional pragmatism decisively overrode personal curiosity about anomalous behavior. "Do it immediately. Full security lockdown across all systems. Chloe, Liam, provide whatever assistance Hart requires for implementation. I want those vulnerable systems completely locked down within the next 60 minutes maximum." He left rapidly to coordinate broader base security response protocols. Willow immediately began implementing sophisticated security procedures that had absolutely nothing to do with standard admin training and everything to do with ISA counterintelligence protocols she'd learned during advanced operations courses years ago. Chloe watched her work with steadily growing amazement. How do you possibly know how to do this level of implementation? Dedicated professional development over extended time. The deflection sounded completely absurd even to her own ears. "This isn't any kind of professional development I've ever seen. This is genuine expert-level security implementation. You're writing complex code and configuring sophisticated systems, like someone who's done this hundreds of times under operational pressure." Willow didn't waste energy responding. She just kept working with focused intensity, racing against hostile actors who might already possess all the critical information they needed to compromise her location, to definitively identify her as active ISA operator, to target her for whatever dangerous purposes had originally motivated the sophisticated security breach. Within 45 intense minutes, she had successfully implemented comprehensive security protocols that would normally have taken professional IT specialists several hours to properly coordinate. Multi-factor authentication across all access points, detailed access logging with automated alerts, sophisticated intrusion detection, triggers that would immediately flag any further penetration attempts. Ronan Drake appeared suddenly in the doorway, tablet clutched in hand, expression unusually grave for normally unflappable intelligence officer. "Hart, I need to speak with you immediately, privately and urgently." They stepped quickly into the conference room. Ronan closed the door with unusual force and studied her with intensity, suggesting he'd reached uncomfortable conclusions that absolutely couldn't be ignored any longer. The security breach was specifically targeted at your personnel file, he said without any preamble whatsoever. Whoever successfully penetrated our supposedly secure systems was systematically hunting for detailed information about Willow Hart specifically. They got everything. Your complete service record, including all the heavily redacted portions I couldn't access with my current clearance level. Absolute ice settled deep in Willow's chest. Complete exposure to hostile actors. Her full ISA background, detailed operational history, possibly even current location at FOB Copper, all successfully compromised. Exactly how much operational information was definitively compromised? Literally everything in your file. 8 full years with intelligence support activity, extensive Ghost Unit 7 operations across Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, and other theaters. Your documented retirement after the Damascus mission went catastrophically wrong and cost American lives. Ronan paused significantly. The critical question becomes, who wants that highly classified information badly enough to penetrate a secure military base's classified systems? I genuinely don't know yet. I think you do know. I think this breach directly connects to whatever actually happened in Syria. I think someone from that compromised operation is actively coming for you right now. And they just successfully confirmed exactly where to find you. He was completely right about the threat assessment. The breach timing, the targeting specificity, the laser focus on her personnel file, this absolutely wasn't random intelligence gathering. This was careful operational preparation. Someone was systematically hunting her, and they'd just acquired all the critical information they needed to execute whatever plan they'd been methodically developing. I need to immediately contact higher command through secure channels. Higher command being ISI operational security? She met his analytical gaze without blinking or deflecting. Yes. So, literally everything Fletcher suspected was actually true. You are special operations working under carefully constructed admin cover. Was special operations. I'm legitimately retired from active operations. This current assignment is genuine administrative duty, not operational cover for ongoing classified missions. Except your dangerous past just catastrophically caught up with your carefully constructed present. Ronan gestured urgently to his tablet. Whoever successfully breached those systems now knows precisely where you're stationed. They know your current cover identity. They know your daily patterns and vulnerabilities. And they presumably have actively hostile intent, or they wouldn't have invested this much sophisticated effort to locate you. Before Willow could formulate appropriate response, the base alarm suddenly screamed. Not the familiar mortar attack warning, but the direct action alert that meant hostile forces had successfully penetrated inside the secure perimeter. Sustained gunfire erupted from the direction of the main gate. We're approaching the moment that will shatter everything. If you want to see Fletcher's reaction when the truth comes out, share this video right now. The algorithm needs to know this story matters. Comment below. What do you think Willow's real background is? Your engagement keeps these stories coming. Willow's deeply ingrained operational training kicked in with poor automatic response. Get to the TOC immediately. Coordinate defensive response. I'll secure the S1 office and protect personnel. Hart, go, right now. Ronan left at a dead run. Willow moved through the office with practiced efficiency honed over years, directing Chloe and Liam to secure positions with clear fields of fire, checking sight lines with tactical precision, calculating angles of attack with the kind of instantaneous awareness that had absolutely nothing to do with admin training. Fletcher burst violently through the door, weapon ready, face flushed with combat adrenaline. We're under coordinated attack, sophisticated assault on multiple entry points simultaneously. This absolutely isn't random harassment. This is carefully planned military operation. How many hostile combatants? Unknown currently. At least 12 fighters confirmed with sophisticated weapons and professional tactics. He stared at her with dawning realization. How are you so incredibly calm right now? Everyone else is understandably panicking, and you look like you're conducting routine training exercise. Because she'd personally survived dozens of attacks significantly worse than this. Because operational calm under direct fire was literally the first critical skill ISA operators mastered. Because panic got people killed unnecessarily, and she'd witnessed enough preventable death to last several lifetimes. Panic doesn't help anyone survive, Sergeant. What's our current defensive posture? Fletcher's expression shifted noticeably as he processed her tactical question. The kind of question combat leaders asked instinctively, not admin clerks hiding from danger. Perimeter security is barely holding, but they desperately need reinforcement. Colonel Vaughn is coordinating overall response from the TOC. Fletcher paused with obvious confusion. He's specifically asking for you by name, immediately. Why would the base commander personally request an admin clerk during active combat operations? I have absolutely no idea, but he was extremely specific. Specialist Hart to the TOC immediately without delay. Something was fundamentally wrong about this situation. Base commanders didn't request junior admin clerks during active combat operations requiring tactical expertise. Unless Colonel Cyrus Vaughn knew something significant about her operational background that completely changed the tactical equation. Unless the security breach had exposed her true identity to everyone with sufficient clearance. Unless her carefully maintained cover had finally, completely, catastrophically collapsed beyond any possibility of repair. Willow grabbed her M9 pistol from her desk lockbox, performed automatic functions check with muscle memory, and headed rapidly toward the TOC with Fletcher following close behind. The base had erupted into organized chaos. Experienced personnel moving smoothly to defensive positions, weapons fire concentrated at entry points, the disciplined response of professional military forces under coordinated attack. But something felt tactically wrong about the assault timing. Too perfectly coordinated with the security breach. Too precisely targeted at the exact moment her cover was most vulnerable to exposure. Someone had deliberately orchestrated this entire sequence. Someone who wanted her exposed, vulnerable, forced into operational response that would confirm her true identity beyond any possible doubt. The TOC was controlled chaos, radio traffic coordinating defensive response across multiple sectors, Colonel Vaughn directing units with calm authority despite intense pressure, Major Barnes managing complex tactical displays, showing hostile positions around the entire perimeter. Vaughn looked up immediately as Willow entered. His expression was carefully neutral, but something significant flickered in his eyes. Recognition mixed with concern, mixed with professional calculation. Specialist Hart, I've just received some extremely interesting information about your actual background and operational history. The exposure was absolutely complete. Vaughn knew everything. Probably everyone with sufficient clearance now knew exactly who she really was. Sir, with all due respect, current tactical situation takes absolute priority over personnel discussions. Completely agreed, which is precisely why I'm about to ask you to step very significantly outside your supposed admin role. He gestured to the detailed tactical display. The hostile assault is heavily concentrated on the east perimeter, but our sensor network detected a small specialized team infiltrating the west sector. Extremely quiet approach, sophisticated equipment, tactics entirely consistent with targeted extraction or assassination operation. You think they're coming for someone specific on this base? I think they're coming specifically for you. Vaughn's gaze was absolutely steady. Your complete file just got exposed to hostile actors. They now know a former ISA operator is currently stationed here, and within 12 hours, we're under coordinated assault with a specialized infiltration team moving directly toward your typical duty locations. He was completely right about the threat assessment. This was targeted operation carefully designed to either kill her or extract her for interrogation, and the main assault was elaborate diversion to draw defensive resources away from the actual operational objective. What specifically do you need from me, sir? I need the highly skilled operator you used to be, not the admin clerk you're carefully pretending to be. I need someone who can identify and neutralize a hostile infiltration team before they achieve their objective and potentially compromise base security. It was direct acknowledgement of her highly classified background, spoken openly in a room full of personnel who would now definitely know Willow Hart was something far more dangerous than admin clerk. The cover was completely destroyed. The only remaining question was whether she could effectively use her actual capabilities to survive what came next. Understood completely, sir. I'll need tactical gear and authorization to operate independently. You'll have both immediately. Sergeant Major Gray will equip you with everything necessary. Vaughn paused significantly. Whatever happened in Syria that ended your operational career, this is a genuine chance to prove you still have exactly what made you exceptional. Syria, the catastrophic mission that broke her completely, the devastating failure that drove her into administrative retirement and years of psychological recovery, the wounds that had never properly healed. "I'll stop the infiltration team, sir." "I know you will. You're Ghost Unit 7. You don't fail twice." Except she had failed catastrophically, in Damascus, when she'd trusted completely wrong intelligence and lost 2 exceptional operators who'd depended entirely on her judgment. But that was past. This was present, and hostile actors were coming for her right now. Sergeant Major Oswald Gray appeared quickly with full tactical gear, plate carrier, ballistic helmet, upgraded M4 with attached advanced optics, flashbangs, and breaching equipment she hadn't physically touched in 2 years. She donned the equipment with muscle memory that had never forgotten a single detail, checking systems with automatic precision that came from thousands of hours of repetitive training. The weight felt familiar, comfortable, like returning home after impossibly long absence. Fletcher watched the dramatic transformation with undisguised shock. "Who are you, really?" "Someone who is exceptionally good at staying alive, Sergeant. Stay in the TOC. This is beyond your skill set." His pride demanded immediate argument, but tactical reality overrode ego. He nodded reluctantly, stepped back, let her move. Willow exited the TOC into chaos, but her operational calm created protective bubble of absolute focus that shut out everything except mission-critical information. Infiltration team approaching from West Sector, estimated 4 to 6 operators with advanced tactical training. Objective unclear, but probably targeted specifically at her. She moved through the base with practiced efficiency, using buildings strategically for cover, staying deliberately off predictable routes, employing exactly the kind of advanced tactics that had made her legendary in ICE operational community. The infiltration team had chosen their approach extremely well, exploiting gaps in defensive coverage created by the main assault, using darkness and chaos as effective concealment. But they were operating in unfamiliar terrain against someone who had spent 6 months systematically learning every single inch of FUB Copper's complex layout. Significant home field advantage. Willow positioned herself along their most likely approach route, found elevated position with commanding sightlines, settled into patient observation that had sustained her through countless surveillance operations. 20 minutes passed. 30, patience was any operator's greatest weapon. Then movement. 4 figures in tactical gear moving with professional competence through the western sector. Good spacing, proper communications discipline, weapons handling that suggested serious specialized training, but not ISA level, not Ghost Unit 7 level. They were skilled. She was exceptional. She let them pass her position, then followed at distance, cataloging their tactics, identifying their leader through subtle behavioral cues, calculating optimal intervention points. They were heading directly toward her quarters, absolute confirmation that she was the primary target. She could eliminate them from current position, had the angle, the capability, the legal justification, but killing them meant never knowing who'd sent them, why they'd come, what larger operation this attack served. Better to capture, interrogate, exploit for intelligence. She moved ahead of their formation using shortcuts they didn't know existed, positioned herself inside her own quarters, waited in absolute darkness with weapon ready and operational calm that felt like meditation. The door breached violently. Flashbang deployment, she'd anticipated it completely, wore eye protection, controlled her breathing through the concussive blast. 4 operators flooded in with professional speed. Willow disabled the first with precise strike to the weapon hand, the second with knee strike that collapsed his stance, the third with weapon retention technique that put him face down before he processed what happened. The fourth, their leader, was faster, significantly more skilled. He adapted immediately, brought his weapon to bear with professional competence. But Willow was already inside his reach, controlling the weapon, executing practiced disarm that sent it clattering across the floor. They fought hand-to-hand in extremely close quarters, trading strikes with practiced efficiency. He was genuinely good, military combatives training, probably special forces background. But she was Ghost Unit 7, trained by the absolute best close-quarters combat instructors in American military. 15 seconds. 20. She controlled his balance, transitioned smoothly to submission hold, applied precise pressure until he tapped surrender. "Who sent you?" she demanded, maintaining control. "Go to hell." Wrong answer. She applied additional pressure, painful but not permanently damaging. Professional interrogation technique. "Who sent you?" You killed Adam Chen and Michelle Rodriguez in Damascus. Someone wants answers about what really happened. Absolute ice flooded through her. Adam and Michelle, the two exceptional operators she'd lost in Syria. They didn't die in Damascus. They died heroically getting us out after the mission compromised. The mission compromised because you trusted the wrong intelligence source. You got them killed through operational failure. Accusation she'd leveled at herself 10,000 times over 2 years. Who wants answers? Their families? People who loved them? People who deserve to know why two exceptional operators died for failed mission. I deserve to know that too. I've spent 2 years trying to understand what went wrong. Then maybe we're on the same side after all. Service members face unique legal challenges that civilian attorneys often don't understand. From administrative separations to security clearance issues, from UCMJ proceedings to VA disability claims, you need representation that knows military law inside and out. Specialized military legal services provide advocacy from attorneys who've worked within the system, understand chain of command dynamics, and know how to navigate complex military justice procedures. Whether it's correcting service records, appealing discharge characterizations, or protecting your rights during investigations, expert legal counsel familiar with military regulations can be the difference between justice and career destruction. She released him carefully, stepped back, but maintained weapon ready. Talk. Adam's brother hired us to find you, to bring you back so you could explain what happened in Damascus. He's not trying to kill you, he's trying to understand why his brother died. Then why the hostile approach? Because ISA operators don't typically agree to informal conversations about classified missions. We needed tactical advantage to ensure cooperation. It made horrible sense. Families of fallen operators seeking closure, hiring contractors with special operations backgrounds to locate and extract someone who disappeared into administrative retirement. Adam and Michelle died as heroes. They saved the rest of the team when intelligence proved compromised. I would have died with them if they hadn't physically forced me into the extraction helicopter. Tell that to Adam's brother, face to face. Give him the closure he deserves. Before Willow could respond, gunfire intensified dramatically outside. The main assault had penetrated inner perimeter. The diversionary attack had become genuine threat. She needed to return immediately to defensive operations. But these contractors had critical information about Damascus. Stand down your assault. I'll talk to Adam's brother, but not now, not while my base is under attack. The contractor considered 3 seconds, then keyed his radio. Alpha Team, abort mission immediately. Extraction point Charlie, immediate withdrawal. Gunfire diminished rapidly. Professional withdrawal, coordinated and disciplined. Thank you. Thank Adam. He wanted his brother to have answers, not revenge. They withdrew with professional competence. Willow watched them go, processing revelations that cut deeper than physical wounds. Adam and Michelle's families still grieved, still sought understanding, still deserved closure she'd been too broken to provide. Maybe it was time to face Damascus instead of hiding from it. She returned to the TOC to find organized chaos transitioning to controlled aftermath. Assault repelled, casualties minimal, defensive response successful. Colonel Vaughn looked up. Status? Infiltration team neutralized and withdrawn. Contractors hired by families of operators killed in Syria. Not hostile, seeking information. Did you provide it? Not yet, but I will. They deserve answers I've been avoiding. Vaughn studied her carefully. The entire base now knows who you really are. Your admin cover is completely compromised. I understand, sir. Which means you have a choice. Continue pretending or acknowledge the operator you've always been. Before she could respond, Fletcher burst in, Forrester behind him, both staring with shock and understanding. I watched security footage. 4 hostile operators breached your quarters. You disabled all of them in under 30 seconds using techniques I've never seen outside Tier 1 demonstrations. Specialized training, Sergeant. ISA training. Ghost Unit 7 training. He paused. Everything I suspected was true. Yes. The admission hung in the air. Final acceptance, her cover was destroyed. Sabira entered, expression transformed from contempt to awe. The security protocols this morning. That was Signals intelligence expertise. Yes. One by one, personnel filed into the TOC. Martha Quinn with knowing smile. Blake Summers with admiration. Liam Turner with pale guilt. Chloe West with support, and finally, Colonel Vaughn in full dress uniform, flanked by Sergeant Major Gray. "Attention on deck," Gray commanded. Everyone snapped to attention. Vaughn moved to center. "Specialist Willow Hart, step forward," she complied, maintaining professional bearing. "I have received confirmation from ISA Command regarding your background." Vaughn's voice carried across the silent room. "Intelligence support activity is one of the most classified units in American military. They conduct advanced force operations, strategic reconnaissance, high-risk intelligence gathering." He paused. "Specialist Hart served 8 years with ISA's operational arm, Ghost Unit 7. She conducted operations in 14 countries, supported missions that saved hundreds of lives, earned decorations I'm not cleared to discuss." Fletcher's expression shifted from suspicion to respect. Her retirement came after a mission in Syria where intelligence proved compromised and 2 teammates were killed. She chose administrative assignment as recovery from trauma. Vaughn stepped closer. For 6 months, she served with quiet professionalism while carrying wounds nobody could see. She's been underestimated, dismissed, mocked. She endured with grace because she was trying to heal. He withdrew a challenge coin bearing ISA insignia. Today she proved operational excellence doesn't disappear. She neutralized hostile infiltration, prevented casualties, demonstrated capabilities that made her legendary. Vaughn extended his hand, revealing dog tags with special ISA markings. "I believe these belong to you, Staff Sergeant Hart." "Thank you, sir." Willow accepted with trembling hands. "What happens next is your choice. Return to administrative duty, or serve in capacity that uses your actual capabilities." Willow looked around. Fletcher with respect, Sabira with acknowledgement, Martha with support, Blake with inspiration. "I'd like to serve in tactical advisor capacity, sir. Welcome back to operations, Staff Sergeant Hart." The room erupted in applause. That ending. "I know you have questions. Part 2 is coming, and it reveals the mission that broke Willow. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Hit that bell icon. These stories don't tell themselves without your support. Comment what you want to see next, and thank you for being part of this community. That evening at Copper's Corner, everything had transformed. People actively sought her company. Junior soldiers asking about careers, NCOs requesting advice, officers acknowledging expertise. Fletcher positioned himself as security. The shift from antagonist to ally was complete. Sabira approached. "I spent weeks dismissing you. In reality, you're more experienced than 90% of this base. We all have biases. What matters is how we respond. Would you brief logistics on operational security?" "I'd be honored." Blake approached enthusiastically. "Ma'am, what you did today was incredible. Could you teach me? I can teach foundational principles." Martha settled beside Willow. "I told you the weight gets lighter when shared. You were right. Being seen, acknowledged for who I am, that's healing." Late that night, Willow pulled out the encrypted phone, powered it on. 3 messages from Ghost Actual. First, "We know what happened today. We're proud." Second, "Damascus has new developments. Survivor willing to provide information. Specifically requested you." Third, "You don't owe us anything. But you owe Adam and Michelle truth." She composed a reply. "I'm ready. Arrange the meeting. I need to understand." Response came immediately. "Meeting confirmed. Damascus Survivor says the mission wasn't what you thought. Intelligence wasn't just compromised, it was deliberately falsified. Someone inside ISA wanted that operation to fail. Ice flooded through her. Deliberate sabotage. Internal betrayal. Who? That's what the survivor wants to tell you, in person. If true, the betrayal goes higher than anyone suspected. Willow processed implications that rewrote everything. She hadn't failed through incompetence. She'd been used by someone who had deliberately sabotaged the mission. Adam and Michelle had been murdered by friendly fire from inside their own organization. New message. Survivor is former ISA analyst. He helped plan Damascus. He's been hiding because what he knows makes him a target. He'll only talk to you. When and where? Germany, Ramstein Air Base, 2 weeks. I'll be there. Good. Because what he has to say changes everything. The activity isn't what you think. Damascus wasn't isolated, and people you trusted might be the ones who betrayed you. Willow composed message to Vaughn. Request 2 weeks leave. Response, approved. Your position will be waiting. Final message to Ghost. Actual. Tell the survivor I'm coming. I want names, evidence, complete truth. Tell him if he's lying, I'll know. And if he's telling the truth, I'll make sure everyone responsible faces consequences. Response? Understood. Willow secured the phone beneath her uniform. Tomorrow she'd prepare for Germany, for confrontation with truth, for answers about the mission that broke her. Tonight she'd allow herself hope that maybe the failure wasn't hers at all, that maybe Adam and Michelle had been sacrificed by systems that should have protected them, that maybe justice was still possible. The phone stayed silent, the base stayed quiet. Night settled with peace. But in Willow Hart's chest, something cold and operationally focused had returned. Ghost Unit 7 was waking up, and someone who'd thought that they'd gotten away with murder was about to discover that some operators don't stay retired. They just wait for the right moment. That moment had arrived,